we are doing season 3 now.
Welcome to the second episode in a theme that discusses manhood, its overwhelming and onerous obligations, and just the stresses that come with it, right? Because we're taught and brought up with the belief that masculinity is something to be embodied, right? A state of being that requires a certain degree of physicality, and one that can only be achieved by those with the physical prowess to, meet the standard.
Yeah.
And for those who can't, well, it's just the core requirement of manhood that you don't meet, right? And if you can't meet that standard, then you have to overcompensate with other standards or other core requirements in order to make up for your shortcoming in that regard.
All power.
All power, right? This we see is often the cause of much of the violence wrought by men and other members of society, and women in particular. And in this episode, we're going to consider those elusive physical requirements of manhood, the difficulty of embodying them, and what the cost is, the social cost, when men fall short of that standard. So I'm going to jump straight into the question, into the delivery. I'll ask you, Tumi, first. When were you first socialized into belief that masculinity is also propensity for violence?
When was I socialized to thinking that masculinity is also a propensity to violence? Man, I think I could give like a very Jordan Peterson evolutionary psychologist answer and say
when you were about 8 years old.
Yeah, exactly. As primates, I could give that kind of answer, but I'll just use my own experience. I think from as early as primary school. Of course, I mean, I think because violence is something you learn as a very young child.
Sure.
Because very quickly, how you go crutch in that environment, you learn that violence is one of the ways to interact, in the sense that it can get you what you want. It could instill fear and all those kinds of things. So there's that dynamic.
But also conflict is a little bit traumatic, right? And
Exactly.
And because it's a component of conflict, it's etching in.
Precisely. Then you have that, right? That's one thing. But I think it's interesting when it gets attached to manhood. Because for me, that journey maybe starts around primary school, where, boys tumble, rough and tumble, boys fight, boys discuss. I mean, we from the ETV movie era, and we from the WWE era. You know what I'm saying? Hey, not midnight. Come on, man.
8 o'clock.
I'm talking about Friday night, action night, bro. Come on, bro.
You went to sleep at 11:59.
Anyway, let's not go there. Anyway, so it was really that thing, right, where you'd have to navigate bullying, you'd have to navigate all of these politics.
Sure.
I remember it was a thing. A discourse among us little primary school boys. Hey, that man, you know what I'm saying? There would be that guy, you know what I'm saying? Because he fights and he breaks you, beats that man. So it's quite a thing. So I think it's around primary school because I think part of the socialization is the notoriety that comes with being able to dispense violence. And that notoriety being given and credited by the boys around you, right? So you become this popular figure among Majitoba and Wanawahobantwala. So it's one of those things that really stay throughout one's life, and it becomes a pursuit. But I think that was when that socialization began for me, probably around primary school.
Frank, how has growing into the person you become now changed your perception and how you navigate violence? How do you navigate violence now?
I think for me, it's never been something that I was used to anyway. I grew up with a very like jittery mother who wouldn't even like it if you raised
jittery.
Yeah, I'd say jittery. She just didn't like it, even if you raised your hands at like your siblings. So, for example, me and my siblings have never, ever had a physical fight. The monopoly of violence belonged to my mother. So that's just it. But like my parents, for example, never fought. I've never seen my dad fight. I've never seen my uncles fight, although I've heard that they can. So for me, the way that I navigated it,
and it's interesting. You heard that they can. So there's that, there's a narrative, there's credit given to them.
That they can, exactly. But so for me, it was never really a personal thing. It's only when I became an adult and I started like noticing just how many people fight, especially in the south of Joburg. Like in the south of Joburg, gun culture isn't big, but fighting culture is. You fight with your knuckles type thing.
The Boetrand.
Yeah, the Boetrand. So, the Gays. So, growing up around Boet and Gay culture was always weird.
Violence.
It was always so...
The other epidemic.
Yeah, hashtag stop Boet and Boet violence. So, no, seriously. But... So for me, I think the man that I became, it was always weird because I never took part in Boet culture. So I would say I've always been a spectator of violence, right? I've either always heard about it, I've seen it from far, but I've never had to take part in it. And as someone who wasn't bullied as a kid, I guess, because I was tall and lanky, no one really picks on that kid because you don't know what they could do. And spoiler alert, he can't do anything. He's just tall. So I've really never had to interrogate violence in a personal space, either acting on it or experiencing it from other people. So for me, what it's then done for the way that I view it is that as an adult, I'm still very fascinated by it and I still don't know how to deal with it. I've had instances where I've heard neighbors being, abused by their male spouses. And everyone will be like, get up, go knock on the door, whatever. I call the cops because I was like, what happens next? Do I, you know what I mean? It sounds easy when you're like, be an ally, use your masculinity. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And if he has a gun, because I'm a spectator to violence, I'm not a participant.
Right.
So I'd say to this day, I'm still trying to navigate that, like, I've never been a participant, always been a spectator. Because it's fascinating, but it's also, you just never know what could happen on the other side.
But we also have this weird thing where we've decided that, like, solving violence requires more violence.
Right.
It's something I've never really done. So
Absolutely.
You touched on an interesting thing about, like, not knowing what a person is capable of. And I think there's a degree to which we all have a slight fear of one another as men. We are cognizant of our ability to cause harm to one another because we know our own propensity for violence. But Thami, maybe touch on how you navigate violence from the perspective of, you've always been the tallest nigger in the world. You've always been just like a generally larger person. You've always been able to physically embody masculinity. So what has that meant for you?
So I can't say I've always been able. Definitely not.
But we met you tall.
Yeah,
Since you were 6.
So I mean, it's very interesting because I don't think there's an extent to which looking the part in terms of looking imposing in a way. There's an instance where that can diffuse things and shield you from violence, But I really think it's very limited, especially in specific circumstances or in protracted periods. So I'll give an example. So I went to a high school where, at least in the first 3 years of my high school career, the school was very violent. It was actually weird. Like I felt like good kid, Mad City Kendrick. Like it was pretty wild, dude. Yeah. I had seen, like, insofar as spectating violence is concerned, I'd seen the craziest fights ever. Like the kind of things that would go viral today, the kind of thing that would make the news. You know what I mean? So I've seen those kind of things where a dude comes into school with a baseball bat, chasing someone. I'm in class, and this guy is being chased in the corridor outside in the other building, being chased by this other guy with a baseball bat, with his t-shirt off. I've seen that kind of thing. You know, I've seen someone being carried out of the boys' bathroom after being beaten to a pulp, like basically half dead, by like a number of dudes, being carried out by teachers into an ambulance outside and police waiting. You know what I mean? I've seen that kind of thing in my high school.
It's like inner city New York school.
No, seriously, it was crazy. There was quite a bit of
You went to school in Queens.
intercultural, inter-ethnic violence. You know, it was weird. So I'd seen a lot of violence, right? But I really decided to stay away from it a lot. And where I would ordinarily use my body in violent ways was to stop a fight. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's where I would try to use my body productively, right? Because I've never been in a fight before, and I can't say I can fight. You know what I'm saying? But I've definitely been in very dangerous physical situations where I put my body on the line. Would I do it today? I don't know. It probably depends on who I'd do it for. Probably for my wife, for my son, putting my own body on the line. Because I think the reality that we're faced with as men, and it's really based on what you've just said right now, we know the propensity we have to violence. We live in a violent world with violent men. Right?
We know our impulses.
We know our impulses as Machita. We know that something could... besides all, these tavern killings that we've been seeing recently, besides that stuff, because many of that stuff is network and gang related and whatever, we can have a discussion about that on another day. But I learned something really weird about, like, South Africa's murder statistics, that like 20% of murders in South Africa are impulse murders from road rage and stuff like that. So that's how violent South African culture is and South African male culture is. And so I know it almost feels inevitable there would be instances where I'd put my body on the line. I often prefer to diffuse a situation. I really think I'm good at that.
It's safest for everyone.
It's the safest for everyone involved. Right. I really think I'm good at that. But I never want to put myself under pressure to put me or the people around me at harm. Because you just don't know what's going to be happening. You just don't know what's going to happen in the end and what's on the mind of the person on the other side.
I think, you mentioned that whole, the idea that, how you physically embody manhood can diffuse tension immediately. And I realized that in sort of growing into the person I am now from a physical perspective. Where 50 kg Tumi always felt like I always felt pushed around, and I always felt like I had to assert myself because of that, right? And it got to a point where like there was 180 in how people received me, where I was generally not seen at all, to the point where, like, if a person accidentally shoulder checked me or pushed me accidentally in a bar or something, they now apologize to me profusely, right? Because like I embodied the kind of male body or male figure that you don't want an escalating tension with, right? But I also in becoming that person, I always felt like there was a chip on my shoulder and a thing I needed to prove, and that's when I learned how to fight. So I'm one of those people who knows how to fight because they've had to learn how to fight.
I've actually had to fight.
That's a thing. And it's actually had to fight for a series of reasons. I used to do things like skateboard and rosette and all. And if you want to keep your phone, sometimes you need to know how to keep your phone. Everything from that to, like, asserting myself and proving a point where I felt like I'd been dismissed, right? So I think that's a really, really interesting point, because for the most part I have since growing physically until 2 days ago, I've never been a victim of crime since then. Have never had to get involved in a conflict, and to the extent that I have been involved in conflict, I've actually been shocked by my capacity to cause harm. With like one of the most recent fights I've been in being one where I really, really injured a person, and I had to take a step back and think, whoa, this is really bad. Like the outcomes of this, you could kill people, right? But I think this sort of like, you touched on using your physicality for the protection of those around you, and that's something I want to ask you both, right? But how has your propensity and capacity for violence impacted how you navigate your romantic relationships, and how has it informed how like women perceive you specifically?
That's an excellent question.
I'll start with Frank.
Well, for me, again, because my impulses, I can't say my natural impulses are violent.
Sure.
I think they manifest themselves in other ways, which are spoken about, like manipulation, blah, blah, which I had to unlearn. But the one thing it has caused me to do, at least at like a meta level, is spaces that I wouldn't want to find myself in with my loved ones who are vulnerable. Right. So, for example, one of the reasons why, there are many reasons why I stopped going out to Groove as much as I used to. Once, just because I got tired. Like, I'm tired of Groove. I had to go to Groove like last week for a work thing, and I was like, yo,
this is killing me.
We're about to Groove right now.
Yeah, for real. Really
gonna groove right
I wanted to order tea. Like we did the last time.
In a teapot.
And just show. So, but I think another tiny reason why I wouldn't want to be at Groove all the time and part of the lifestyle, or at least some places, not all, with loved ones, is that, like you never know what could happen at Groove, what type of angry people you might find there.
And
so
they'll turn to you for protection.
Exactly, right? And it's not so much that I mind that they'll turn to me for protection, but it's the fact that I guess maybe, it's like, okay, what's next? Like, is someone going to get hit? Because someone is. And if I'm not there with a group of friends and they are, you do know how this is going to end, right? Like, you do know how this is going to end. So at a meta level, I think there are some spaces that I just wouldn't want to hang out in at all, where I think staying away from them generally will protect you. And even if I do find myself in spaces like that, it's about who am I with? What are we there for? Right? I think it's a lot easier for me to go out to Groove with gents than it would be with my person or with my sister. So for me, I like to think of it at a meta level and just say, where am I staying away from in general? This isn't to say I wouldn't go to Groove. This isn't to say don't invite me, but it is to say a lot of thought goes into
where
places like
it's like there's something I want to say,
and it's not just taverns, by the way. Get it out of your mind that it's just a tavern. It's everywhere.
People could be wearing Gucci, bro.
Yeah, people could be at Monarch. People could at
Monarch is specifically the kind of place I'd avoid with my
So
just, goes to show people can be wearing Gucci and stuff.
Exactly.
Whip out a gap.
Dude. It's like you in some instances you navigate these weird animal politics where territory. You add Groove, but like you have to assert territory over your spouse because all the other guys can see the consumable asset that she is in their minds, isn't it? And so
you're doing that. Are you doing that partly for protection, but also because you feel disrespected, or what is?
No, firstly for her protection.
Sure.
Secondly, because this is the person I am with and I came with today. Do you see what I'm saying? Thirdly, I don't want to be bothered. But the thing is that when you are in spaces like that, very often, like it's like part of the game is to use devices of power. It doesn't always have to be violent. Sometimes it can be money and this kind of this and that. You know what I'm saying?
Just to assert, stay away from.
Exactly. So I want to say something about like environments that you travel in, dude. Because I had a conversation with my dad about this like a while ago, and I told him, I've never been in a fight before. And my dad is like, that's crazy. I'm actually happy for you because you've never had to fight. And because he's like, bro, I don't like fighting, but I basically fought all my life. It's not like I like it. So not everybody,
luxury,
you know what I'm saying? That not everybody that's within wants to do it. It's because they've had to. The environment around. I remember, dude, I was in Braam. First year, I lived in Braam. I'm walking with 3 girls, right? These are girls I went to high school with, so these are good friends of mine. We're walking, we just dropped off our friend, we're walking back to Beckard, which is the back of Bram by the
edge.
Queen's Bridge.
Yeah.
By the edge of Bram, where people get robbed at gunpoint like all the time.
Yeah, it's the end of gentrified Joburg.
It's the end of gentrified Joburg.
the
Like it's in between.
Joburg.
It's between gentrified Joburg, and more gentrified Joburg. So that's how Joburg is.
Patches.
Bro, anyway, we're walking, right? Re 3, yeah? No, re 4. It's me and 3 girls.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, this guy is being beaten up by these 3 other dudes, right? And there are like 2 girls standing there on the side as well. I think they're fighting for girls. Do you see what I'm saying? My impulse in that moment, right? It was such a bad beating. It was weird, dude. My impulse in that moment was, let me get the girls that I'm with
away
from this situation,
Right.
right? Because someone else in that moment would have tried to be a hero for that guy.
Right.
They knocked him out right there. We all saw it. Like they knocked him out dead sleep.
Yeah.
Right? But again, in that moment, it's like my impulse would be to, okay, let me just avoid this.
Exactly.
Right? I'm with...
Because that's what guaranteeing their safety requires.
Precisely.
In that
So
moment, yeah.
sometimes, it's not about in that moment being heroic in that sense, in the classic sense. Sometimes it's about avoiding violent people for the purposes of those you love. So using your body for protective purposes. If that guy came for attack, well, it is what it is. I have to do what I have to do to protect them, because they could be in harm, right? So it's one of those things, man. And also like navigating different spaces and avoiding spaces that are not productive has been very helpful for me.
No, that's a really interesting perspective, Charles. I think similarly to how we've broadened how we define provision, we must also broaden how we define providing and ensuring the security of our loved ones. But I think, we mentioned, one of you sort of alluded to how we distrust, not necessarily how distrust, but how we're all cognizant of one another's ability to cause harm to another. And I wanted to get your perspectives on how important touch in platonic relationships is, and how that has translated and filtered through to how you relate to other men, right? And whether or not that distrust for other men or awareness of another man's ability to cause you harm physically has informed how you relate to touch. And I'll sort of give you an idea. I read an article once about how touch is a necessary connection needs for a lot of men, but our platonic relationships are largely devoid of touch, and it's because the contention of the author was that we're all hyper aware of our ability to impose sexual violence on women, and as a consequence are aware of our ability to impose similar violence on men, which is why we regulate how touch manifests in our platonic relationships so strictly.
I mean, think about that thing with urinals, for example. It's one of those things, like it's code, unwritten. But you don't stand next to each other at a urinal, because
I use cubicles now, permanently.
Exactly, you know what I'm saying? Because you just have an inherent distrust of each other.
Sure.
Yeah.
But tell me, Tom, because you're a really, really affectionate person, but tell me how the ways in which you like to receive affection from, let's say, your wife, because it doesn't suddenly go away because, you're receiving affection from a male friend. How have the manners in which you like to receive affection broadly translated into your platonic relationships?
It's very interesting. Again, I think we had a similar conversation when we were talking about friends in the last season, and also reflected on it a bit when we talked about boyfriends. It's love languages, really.
It is love languages.
So one of my love languages is physical touch. And I express it. I kind of do. Even at a platonic level, I give my friends hugs, actively give my mates hugs. I don't kind of linger and do uncomfortable things, because I'm aware that people are also uncomfortable, and that may not also be your love language. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm also in a very large way socialized also not to hug and linger as well. With a much, you know what I'm saying? So I've also had to learn how to express myself in that way. Do you see what I'm saying? Yo, shout out Nelson Mandela, guys. And Mandla Lang. Anyway. So there's that, you know what I'm saying? So, but I think the important thing about allowing one's reception and expression of love to not be limited is to not find yourself in a situation where your emotions are bottled. Because that's the one fine we always get as men, is that we bottle our emotions all the time. And the reason why we bottle our emotions is not always a conscious thing, but it's because we don't have avenues to express our emotions. If you really feel like gleefully happy for your friend, and you love them in that moment, I don't know what just happened, maybe they just signed a great contract and you really want to hug them, don't prevent yourself from expressing that emotion. You don't know the harms that could have cumulatively in future
for you or for your friend.
You and for your friend. Do you see what I'm saying? So let that go. Let express yourself. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying do things that are uncomfortable to the both of you, of course, right? But I'm just saying, express your emotion, express your love in a safe way, because that's the other thing, is that we have close friends as Machita, but we're not always even trusting of our close friends, because we're not vulnerable with our close friends. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's the thing that I want us to really, really think about, is part of safety and creating a safety net. Because I'm not saying express your love for the world and for everybody you see and all those kinds of things, no. But create a safe space and environment, and the way to do that is through vulnerability, and that is the only way all your love languages can be expressed and also received.
That's powerful. Frank, when did you first carve that space for yourself to express love and affection, however you decide you want to do it?
I haven't.
Oh, let's end the episode.
That's it. I'll be honest with you, I haven't. I'm very uncomfortable with
obviously not just extending to touch, but just
I'll speak about the other ones. I'm fine with. Like verbally, I'm fine with. I open up verbally. We talk all the time. I don't hold anything back.
And that's what I'm saying. It's about love languages.
But my love language is touch. That's the scary thing. Touch is my second love language. It really is. Right.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah. So it's definitely number 2, and I do know that I enjoy it a lot. But I don't trust men. And the reason for that is because, although, like I said, I was never a participant in violence and I was never bullied at school, one thing I distinctly remember about school, because I went to a school where the classes were gendered. It was, girls and boys at the school, but the classes were gendered. So I experienced all boys school dynamics, or at least got to watch them again from my ivory tower. And the one thing I always observed about dudes is how insincere touch was for them and how untrustworthy they were. So, for example, guys would go from putting their arms around you and hugging you to literally, there's this thing called an egg flap. Egg flaps, where you literally run your hand past a guy's testicles like that, and it's like it's so, right? It's it's so, if you've ever accidentally bumped your balls next to something, imagine someone intentionally doing that to you.
Flapping.
So dude, you lower your guard enough to be physically vulnerable with the person.
And before you know it,
violation.
Just violation of all sorts of parts of your body. So what that meant is that in my teenage years, I was very distrusting of touch in general, because I've seen how it can end up. The one moment this dude's putting his arm around you, you're celebrating something, the next moment egg flap or that nipple twisting thing, because when you're going through puberty, y'all remember that, like your body's just too stonies and you're too sensitive. So I never got over the idea that's why, for example, it took long for us to hug as mates. I think it took us 3 years, right? I point to him in particular because I had the most difficulty, because he's a touchy guy. It took me 3 years to be like, okay, he's not going to give me an egg flap. We're 23. But
I don't even know what that is, dog.
Exactly. But I always had that lingering
Private
thought
schools,
that private schools are violent.
Oh my
But
gosh.
anyway, I always had this lingering thought that if a dude wants to touch you, it's probably insincere.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
don't think I've gotten over that.
Yeah,
So the reason
yeah.
why I don't stand next to another dude in a urinal, for example, and again, it's not that I'm scared that they're gonna, it's just that I'm like, hey man, an
Yeah.
egg flap sucks.
Give me my space,
And I
right?
don't
Just
trust
give me my
you.
damn
I just
space.
don't trust
yeah.
you. Like, it's not the fear that you'll beat me up and
It's been
pummel me.
violated. Yeah.
It's just that you might
going to
egg
do
flap
something
me.
I
yeah, something stupid like
You know what I
that.
mean?
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna lie, I haven't gotten over it, and
That's
I don't think
interesting.
I've carved out the touch element with my male friends enough.
That's
I'm not sure if
interesting.
I'll do it anytime soon, but the verbal one is broken, and I'm open.
I think that's an interesting point because it made me realize that I'm very physically affectionate. It's
Yeah.
probably my most important love language between myself and my partner. But
Right.
it doesn't translate in the same way or to the same degree as it does in my platonic relationships.
Yeah.
Do you ever think that like being physically affectionate is something that hyper-masculine men get to do?
Right.
You know, like it's and I don't know why I'm dragging you a bit.
Yeah.
I don't know why. No, I'm joking. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's because hyper-masculine men feel. Or men who just embody masculinity better than others, right? I
Yeah.
don't know if it's because they feel safe enough to do so.
Exactly.
But if a person who appears as less masculine being physically affectionate might make it look like it's a little bit homosexual, right?
Yeah.
Or homoerotic or just
Yeah.
not straight, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's something that was always like a thing in my mind, right? Is just
Yeah.
like there are for somebody who looks like me,
Yeah.
in order to be able to continue to embody masculinity and manhood, I need to do it like A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And being physically affectionate with my friends doesn't mean I'm no longer fulfilling the obligation.
That's a
But I
good one.
also do think that there's a degree to which I just distrust niggas.
Yeah, I really do.
And there's certain friends I've become more comfortable being affectionate
Absolutely.
with because they make me feel safe.
And they won't egg
Oh,
flap
yeah,
you.
right? And they won't egg flap you. But it's just because like
a funny name,
It's because a hug from Tumi will make me feel just as safe as a hug from my partner or my mother or whatever,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Have to learn that.
You know, but it's something you have to specifically learn.
Right.
My sister's boyfriend is a very, very affectionate person.
Super.
Right?
I like him a
and
lot.
I adore him.
Yeah,
and
he's
I've
a
told
great
him
guy.
that I love him. He's an awesome guy. I love him for me. I love him for my sister.
Yeah.
He's also very affectionate. And
Yeah.
I haven't told him this. He's gonna see when he sees it. But like I've had to learn not to recoil when he puts his arm.
Yeah. It's something you have to learn.
Or, you know, and it's
So interesting.
It's and because he is genuinely sincere. He's
Yeah.
a very, very outwardly loving person. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. But I think this segues us nicely into how I wanted us to conclude the conversation.
Right.
And ultimately, the question for me is this: why do you think some men are intent on physically dominating physically weaker people while some just aren't?
I think to get to that answer, I'm gonna piggyback on something that Bongani said about the whole egg flapping thing.
Piggyback the thing.
It's very interesting because being devoid, you just gave us a very pure, practical example of how one can be socialized to avoid a specific love language
Yeah.
as a result of the way men interact with each other.
Right.
So it's not an accident.
Without even being a victim.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
just
You're not
saw
even
it
a
and I was
victim
like,
necessarily.
I don't want that.
Do you see what I'm saying? And now violence is a way that men regulate each other. It's funny. And it happens when you are a child.
Yeah.
Because you were a kid in those instances.
Exactly.
And now you are regulated basically into your adulthood. And
where the stakes or the consequences of violence are so much more severe.
exactly,
Yeah.
precisely. So I think that's the thing that we need to reflect on is to what extent has violence been engendered in our minds? How to what extent has it burned into our subconsciousness as Majita, as a way to, as a tool we can use all the time?
Yeah.
Right? Because to me, I think the question is not only about why are men physically dominating other men,
Yeah.
but why do men physically dominate women
That's
and
effectively
children?
what I wanted to
Do you see what
ask.
I'm saying? Because it gets there. Because it's learned behavior that I learned to be violent so that I can use it one day
Right.
for the purposes of X, Y, and Z. So I can control my wife's. So I can use fear as a device to control my wife's actions.
I guess also there's a degree to which we'll use whatever we have, right? Like
Precisely.
we'll use whatever. You know, I was thinking about how, like, you know, a lot of. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was talking about how he, especially in like intimate and sexual interactions with his partner, doesn't feel the need to be dominated or to be dominating because he doesn't feel disempowered elsewhere in the world. In fact, he feels really, really tired at the end of a long day, having to make so many decisions about all of these things that have these like national scale impacts, right? And like consequences. And when he gets home to his partner, he doesn't want to think anymore. He doesn't want to have to assert himself anymore. In fact, he'd really like it if she took the reins and whipped him. You know what I mean? So like, and that's just a sexual fetish he's defined. And I think, you know, it's there's a degree to which like not being disempowered can you know can stabilize men.
Precisely.
Yeah, Frank. Closing thoughts?
I'm largely covered, I think, by what Thami said. I really, really am. But I think for me, a closing thought would have to center around. Maybe I need touch therapy for one. I don't know. I'll say it on record. I don't know. Probably is. Some types of therapy. I think touch therapy should be. But in any case, I think. I think it is important because this is only an exercise I did very, very late on in my life, which is reflecting how touch affects my psyche, right? I know that's not the crux of what I was saying today, but in retrospect, I think it was the most important reflection I made today, is definitely that. So, the ways in which we're not trusting of men around us, and also the actions that we commit to men around us and how comfortable they are with the way we behave around them. So, for example, if you are a very touchy guy, again, ask yourself, is this person comfortable with that? By the way, I am now, so don't not like hug and stuff. But I'm just saying that it gives us that opportunity.
It's emotional EQ, bro.
Yeah.
It's consent.
Yeah, it's also consent. It's also consent. Exactly. A huge part of that, I think, as men is having conversations about our experiences with violence, whether experiencing it directly, seeing it, our fears around it, and what that means for the way we navigate things like touching each other, and whether that triggers thoughts of violence or whatever. So wasn't the crux of what I said, but in retrospect, this, I think, the most compelling thing for me personally that I reflected on. And
I think that I definitely relate to that deeply and resonate with that. But I think also, you know, if we can find and carve space for us to be who we are freely, we'd just all be better off. If we could divorce the conditions from our manhood and then we'd have the freedom to exist as freely as we intend to. But yes, shout out to Tabo for overall production, shout out to Lou and Tato for video and audio production, shout out to Mohale for our branding, shout out to Empire Partner Foundation for hosting us, and please remember to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please also remember to give us a 5-star review. We have built a system that shows us everybody who doesn't give us a 5-star review.
Yes.
And I have a gun license now. I'm joking. But reach out to us via the survey in the episode and podcast description. And ultimately, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Cool.